Welcome back to Paranormal Perspective. I'm John Lordan, and as always, joining me is...
Christy Arnhart.
It's the show where Christy brings up a paranormal story. We try to review sometimes evidence that she brings to us. We ask the live audience that's watching us film this a question, mash all that together, and wind up with some form of a conclusion. So, Christy, what is the story for today?
Well, before I tell you the story, I have to tell you something that happened this past week.
Okay.
I have my mother's phone set up so that notifications come through when Paranormal Perspective is released so she can watch it, right?
Yeah.
She pulls it up Monday, and my sister said she started having a fit. Who is this? Who is this on here? This is not my daughter. Who has he got on there now? I said, did you not recognize me? She said, no, I didn't. Not until Carrie pointed it out. And I'm like, I see you every other day. You know what I look like. They're like, well, your hair was down and we just didn't know who it was. I'm like, oh my God.
Wow.
That does not bode well for
Which
me.
episode? Do you remember what episode it was?
Well, it was this week's episode.
So cryptids, I think?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Well, I'll put a screenshot in here. You guys tell us, does Christy look the same from that shot to here? I think so, but I don't know. Apparently her mother did not
to my
recognize
mother,
her.
Evidently.
You're internet unfamous. Imagine that.
I get.
Yeah, even your own family.
My 9-year-old niece will tell people, my nene's famous. And I try to correct her. I'm like, no, Karis, I'm not. She's like, yes, you are. She's famous.
That's so sweet.
Okay. The show today, my question is, was the Atlas vampire a real vampire?
The Atlas vampire? A vampire that would only eat atlases? Sucked the blood out of an atlas?
No. Yeah, people wish that were true. That'd be much better than what actually happened.
Oh, goodness. Okay.
Oh, yeah. So on March 4th of 1932, a prostitute named Lily Lindstrom was found murdered in her apartment in the Atlas neighborhood of Stockholm, Sweden. I think today this area is called Vasastan.
Okay.
She was 32 years old, and she was one of the first call girls. So while everybody else was street walking, she would take phone calls on the community phone in the apartment building and have these men come up to her apartment because she learned from Jack the Ripper. Oh, okay. At least some did, you know?
Yeah.
So the last person to see Lily alive was her neighbor, another prostitute named Minnie Jansen. Lily had come over to borrow condoms from her because safe sex.
Yeah.
Now, after a couple of days, Minnie hadn't heard from Lily. So she goes to the apartment. It's locked. She's not answering, so she calls the police. When the police arrive, they find Lily dead in the apartment. She had been dead for a few days, so it must have happened right after she talked to Minnie. They found her naked, laying face down on the bed. Her clothes were neatly folded nearby and laid on a chair by the body. She had died from blunt force trauma and taken several hits to the back of the head. So this should be messy, you know?
Yeah.
And it was also apparent that Lily had sex just before she was murdered. So they assume that the person, you know, her John, is the one who did this. I don't know. I think somebody else could have snuck in there at some point, but maybe I'm wrong. Now, strangely, for a murder like this, there was next to no blood in the room at all. And when they looked at Lily, she had no blood in her body. When they examined her, the killer had left his saliva on her neck and other parts of her body, but they found no puncture wounds. There were no fingerprints in the apartment. It had been wiped clean. And on the floor beside the bed was a blood-stained soup ladle that detectives assume the killer used to drink her blood from.
What year is this?
1932, I believe.
Okay.
Yes,
okay. I'm just trying to get a frame of reference for like the type of forensics and stuff they'd be able to do. Okay, gotcha.
Yeah. Unfortunately, with what they had nowadays, it would have been a closed case. But back then, no, they didn't have this. So they assumed that he drank her blood from that. Well, did he drink all of it? because there was next to no blood anywhere in the apartment. Even after the blunt force trauma, there should have been blood spatter everywhere, and there wasn't.
Hmm.
So they had and they did have the time to clean it up. I will admit that.
Yeah.
Because everything in there was so neat, and the clothes were so odd to have been set there like that. And if you go back into vampire myths, you hear about they spread rice or sand, things like that, because the vampire has to count it. They keep things very neat. They're almost like obsessive compulsive like that, I guess.
Okay.
So I think
not just the one on Sesame Street, I guess. I thought that was his thing. That he had to count everything.
No, well, okay. He does too, though. So see, there we go. There's evidence.
There we go. You sent me some pictures. Do I need to bring any of them up yet? Okay.
Yes.
Let's see what you got here.
So our first one here is your typical vampire sneaking in to get the lovely lady.
Okay.
That one's just there for atmosphere.
Okay. Yeah, this guy looks like he's armed. But yeah, I see.
Oh, I'm sure.
Yeah.
I'm sure. That's his daughter, This is a picture of Lily.
Oh, this is
I was so glad that they had a picture of her, because when these older cases come up, you don't always get that. But I always really like to have a face to put with all this.
Yeah, definitely.
Now, this is her bed and the two chairs that were sitting nearby. This is one of the crime scene photos. And I mean, I don't know. It's an old photo and I can't really tell a lot from it, but I wanted everybody to be able to see it,
Yeah, it's hard to tell especially with black and white photos when you're considering something like this. Like, could this dark blotch on this side of the pillow be blood? Could there be some blood on here? But even if there is, it's not a lot, at least from what I can make out in this photo.
No, and there should have been.
Yeah. Okay.
I think. Okay, now this one is an actual drawing of the room itself.
Okay.
It shows you where she was found, where the ladle was found. Just, your general drawing. And I think the next one is a more detailed one, maybe. Oh, no, this is the evidence, guys. They still have this evidence today. They have saliva. They have hair samples. They even have some of the condoms that were in the room.
Well, that's interesting to think of with modern forensics, because if they have the saliva, they could theoretically use that for genetic genealogy and trace it back and figure out who did this, possibly, as long as descendants have, entered into GEDmatch or something like that. But
and they have some other body fluid in there too that they can test that may do better. But they've actually got it in a museum in Sweden now, and you can walk up and look at it. But I'm with you. I'm like, genetic genealogy. I don't want anyone to pay for this murder. It's obvious this man is dead and has been for a while.
Yeah.
But
yeah, they would have to be careful with that type of information, because basically you're gonna kind of blast a family. But they could do the footwork of it and not release all that information. They could just be like, hey, we've found who the likely suspect is, or something like that.
That way, you can mark it off, because they talked to all of the Johns that came to her apartment to see her. They said it was 9 different men. None of them were connected in any way to the murder. But that's only the ones that they knew about. This area was big for prostitution at that time. It was after the World War. It was, the Depression, it hit everybody. Even in Sweden, they were affected by this because it was mentioned. And I wouldn't have thought that. But it was. So they ruled out her Johns, and then they started to think, well, maybe it's a cop, because a cop would have known how to wipe the room down to make sure, there were no fingerprints or evidence like that.
Okay.
But even that, I don't know.
It's an important question, I think, that they're bringing up, because if we remove the supernatural component and remove, the thought that, well, it could be a vampire that did this and that's why there's no blood. There are other kind of reasonable explanations, like, it was a bloody scene, but it was cleaned up. Or this person did something in terms of how they attacked her or when they attacked her. Like, maybe there was another sheet that was on the top of the bed when the attack happened, and then, they took that off and threw on another blanket. There's kind of some reasonable explanations that we know just about crime scenes from looking into all the stories that we have over the years that could kind of explain it in some way. The ladle thing, is interesting to me just because I can't really imagine what you would do with that or how you would use it. Like, even if I let my imagination run down this train of thought about like, okay, someone wants to drink her blood. Like, at least nowadays we have such a firm vision in terms of what a vampire does to drink blood. You know, like they puncture a hole, they go up to the hole, and they drink the blood directly. So the ladle thing's just interesting to me in terms of, I think if you remove the supernatural component, the ladle becomes a way more interesting piece of evidence. Because how often do you hear about that in a crime scene? There was a ladle that was found with blood on it. Yeah.
And I mean, they found no puncture wounds. So even if he had an apparatus to drain the blood out into something, there was no signs of it on her body.
Well, and the type of damage that you were talking about that was inflicted upon her sounds like pretty much blunt force trauma, right?
Yeah. Yeah, that's what she died from.
It almost makes me wonder, like, was the ladle used as a weapon in some way? Was that an object that he had struck her with or something?
I don't know. They said that they never found the actual murder weapon itself. And they went through the area. They talked to everybody in the apartment buildings and whatnot, and they never found a second crime scene.
Yeah, that's another good aspect to try to head off. Wow. So where does it sit? Where does this case kind of sit nowadays?
It has always remained unsolved. They have no suspects. They do not have a clue who committed this, which again speaks to the paranormal aspect to a lot of people, because it's almost like it's magic that he got away from the police like that. I mean, no one saw anyone going in and out. No one saw anyone covered in blood, dragging a body. I mean, all of this, somebody should have seen something. It could have, I guess, been, oh, I don't want to talk to the police. What if somebody comes after me? It could have been a case like that.
Yeah. It's hard to analyze just because we've got some pieces, and whenever something I certainly learned from looking into the Elisa Lam case is when there's a gap in information, people rush to fill it. And they'll rush to fill it with whatever. Unfortunately, a lot of personal agendas get thrown in there. There's a lot of stories that people are trying to bring forward, and when they find a case like that has a big gap in knowledge, they'll go and they'll try to jam there. It's almost like a soapbox. Like, oh, okay, this is the perfect space for me to get up on my soapbox and start screaming at the world about this thing again. What do you know what type of museum this is in? Is it like a paranormal museum that these items of evidence are in, or is it like a crime museum?
Hold on just a second and I'll pull it up.
I'm just curious. Just curious how
it's not, I want to say that it's like a police museum that they have set up. Let me check.
Yeah. I'm just curious to kind of understand how the authorities and how the local culture are actually viewing that story. You know, like if this was found in Zach Bagans' Museum of the Weird in Las Vegas, or, you know, like something like that, then I'd be like, okay, well, I see how they're trying to lead.
You're like,
this
I
story.
understand this now.
Yeah.
It's in the Swedish Police Museum.
Okay.
And now I don't know about any chain of custody or anything like, and I don't know when it went into the museum, because I think Chris asked that.
Yeah, it's a good indicator for me that, you know, law enforcement is presenting it in that way, as kind of, I would imagine they're presenting it as a historical unsolved case, and maybe the aspect of was it a vampire has helped it kind of grow or stay in the public mindset. But
it did, and it especially helped grab everybody when it was first published, because you know that they latched on to the vampire aspect right at the beginning. Oh,
sure. And think about media back in the 1930s, 1920s, like, you know, yellow journalism could still be going on. It even hit me with some of the diagrams that you sent. Like, I'm like, oh, I saw old news articles like that, you know, like when I've been researching other cases. Like the H.H. Holmes one comes to mind, because there was literally, like, his whole hotel was drawn out in one of the newspapers. And now historians are saying, they're like, that drawing was crap. Like that drawing had nothing to do with reality. It was just pure yellow journalism. Someone made it up because they were trying to sell newspapers. So it's interesting to me that, you know, information used to be shown that way in newspapers back at that time. So yeah,
I
can
love
see
it.
that.
I kind of wish they still did stuff like that.
I'm sure there's
Seriously.
publications. Well, then you need to get on TikTok because there's plenty of people that are relaying bad information. Okay, let's take a look at what the audience, the live studio audience here thinks. Now, Christy, you seem defensive. You want to say something before I end the poll here?
No, I just want to say, not to, yeah, Kira's like, Christy is on TikTok, John. And there are no lies on my channel. But and then it isn't to demean this woman's murder. I'm not trying to just entertain people over it. As a thought exercise, can you rule out the fact that he was a vampire? I couldn't.
Yeah, and I think there's something to be said for people that consider themselves vampires and do things of that nature, and there's a reality to that. Like, you know,
yeah. One argument is that he had Renfield syndrome.
Yeah,
so.
all vampires are not necessarily paranormal. Like I recognize that there's a reality component to that. The audience comes back for this specific case with 75% do not think that the Atlas vampire was a real vampire.
I understand.
25% say yes. Yeah, and honestly, I think we might have rephrased that question a little bit, just because it could have been like a vampire wannabe. Like when I think of a real vampire, the first thing my mind goes to is what we've seen in the movies and stuff like that. Oh, it changes into a bat. He can't go out in the sun, blah, blah, like all that stuff kind of comes in with it. And I think in the reality of our world, there's different levels of people that would be like, I'm a vampire because I drink animal blood, or, you know, like there's different levels to that. So
yeah, there are.
Unfortunately, Christy, you're gonna have to watch this video.
Man.
I know. To go with your fake vampire, we have a fake ghost. Fake. I do hope that they run the genealogy. I do, like, just for
they don't have to out anybody, but they can let it be known this was a real person and not a supernatural creature, you know?
Right. Yeah, absolutely. They could tell the story without outing the family. Like, I'm really, really sensitive to that aspect of it. I would not want them to come out and be like, it was the Smith family's great-great-great-great-grandfather. Like, who would that benefit? There'd be no benefit at all.
Well, it's like that Italian family that we did. I think it was a case cracked on. You know, they didn't just uncover the murderer. They uncovered the fact that the wife, you know, the infidelity in the marriage, and they're Catholic. And to this day, she won't admit it, but everyone knows she had an affair. You know, that ruined that family.
Yeah,
it really
absolutely.
did.
But knowing that it's a case of historical importance, I do think there'd be some value in them actually putting the little bit of money.
I do too.
And I think you would get volunteers all over this, like, you know, for genealogy researchers. So I think they could do it for not a whole lot of money and get to an answer. But anyway, we'll see if it happens. Please set up a Google alert and let me know if the Atlas vampire is ever identified.
I will.
All right. Christy, thank you so much for all your hard work on this. We really appreciate you. And we'll see you again next week. For all of you, thanks for joining us. And we will catch you on the other side.